Good evening and welcome to the special event for to listen to the work and the social activism of Bianca Jagger, who we are honoring this evening. I'm Homi Bhabha and I direct the Humanities Center at Harvard. Bianca Jagger's first encounter with human rights struggles took place on the streets of her native Managua, where she witnessed a massacre of students by the National Guard and joined protests against the brutalities of the Somoza regime. She returned to Nicaragua in the aftermath of the devastating 1972 earthquake and witnessed how corruption compounded the suffering. You found kids dying in the streets, she remembered, and you found people who wouldn't be fed unless they had a little red flag that said that they had voted for Somoza. Most of the international aid went directly to Somoza. I was suddenly confronted with something. It was as if I had suddenly opened my eyes to something I never knew before. And indeed, it is one of the most moving and also most inspiring experiences in the life of Bianca Jagger, that she has actually confronted these enormously dangerous, life-threatening conditions herself in the struggle that she has mounted for human rights internationally. From this moment of awakening, Bianca Jagger's tireless work on behalf of human rights, civil liberties, peace, social justice, and environmental protection has extended, as I said, internationally, from Latin America to Afghanistan, Bosnia to India. As founder and chair of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, she has campaigned against oppressive governments, genocide, mass rapes, violations of indigenous rights, and the death penalty throughout the world. She has been recognized for her extraordinary efforts with many awards and honors, including the Right Livelihood Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, the Amnesty International USA Media Spotlight Award for Leadership, the United Nations Earth Day International Award, the World Citizenship Award from the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and the American Civil Liberties Union Award. Bianca Jagger's presence amongst us today raises the urgent issues of violence against women and girls the world over. Nowhere have I experienced this human tragedy more acutely than in my own country, India. Poverty, disempowerment, illiteracy, unemployment, religious bigotry, patriarchal authority, political corruption, police brutality. These elements of state violence, enmeshed with violence in the domestic and public spheres, has unleashed a veritable epidemic of violence against women and girls. Is this a new phenomenon? Emphatically not. Has this become a flashpoint between India's social crisis, its moral crisis too, and its global development? Undeniably so. I look forward to Bianca Jagger's reflections and responses because of my profound belief that what we so flagrantly see in India is present in one way or another in many parts of the fast globalizing world. Bianca Jagger's topic this evening is especially timely for the Mahindra Humanities Center. Next fall, we will be launching a 3-year university-wide seminar supported by the Mellon Foundation on violence and nonviolence. The call to arms and the politics of nonviolent resistance are often represented as polarities. There are, however, many gray areas that define the dialectical relationship between violence and nonviolence. Our seminar will study violence and nonviolence in a comparative global context to advance our knowledge of their complex relationship, its distinctions and dependencies. We will also explore a range of genres of conflict with a view to understanding the role played by violent and nonviolent engagements in different historical, cultural, and political contexts. At the same time, the seminar will provide an occasion for occasions such as this, when public figures with an outstanding record, both of reflection and activism, of writing and public speaking, come to us here and do us the great privilege of sharing with us not only their anxieties about a fast-changing world, a world of violence, a world of inequality, but also their deeply held beliefs and aspirations. Dear friends, I want you to welcome a very special guest, Bianca Jagger.
Thank you, Professor Homi Bhabha, for your kind words. And thank you all for being here tonight. And for inviting me. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here speaking to you today. Before addressing the subject of my speech, I'd like to tell you a little about myself and the experiences which drove me to commit my life to speaking up for women's rights. I was born in Managua, Nicaragua, and when I was 10 years old, my parents divorced, and my mother found herself single, without a profession, and with 3 small children to care for. I watched her being discriminated against because of her gender and status. During those difficult years, she exhibited great courage and strength. She believed in women's emancipation at a time when women were regarded as second-class citizens and were expected to devote themselves exclusively to homemaking. My mother was a pioneer. I admire her independence. She never gave up. She was my role model. There have been some progress since then. Conditions have improved for women in Nicaragua and throughout the world. Women are excelling in many fields. We have almost achieved equal pay in some countries. We have different lives today to those of our grandmothers and even our mothers, but gender equality is far from achieved. We still face unconscionable levels of discrimination and violence. The stark reality is that women are still a vulnerable group. And you know, when I wrote that phrase, a vulnerable group, I thought a lot about it, because my foundation, the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, and myself, throughout the last 30 years, I have campaigned for the most vulnerable group, and by that I mean children, women, indigenous people, prisoners in death row. And I thought to myself, we are still a vulnerable group. Nicholas D. Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times journalist, has written, in the 19th century, the central moral challenge was slavery. In the 20th century, it was the battle against totalitarianism. We believe that in this century, the paramount moral challenge will be the struggle for gender equality around the world. For nearly 3 decades, I have campaigned for human rights, social justice, and environmental protection throughout the world. I have been speaking up for women's rights for most of my adult life. I founded the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, BJHRF, in 2006 to be a force for change and a voice for the most vulnerable members of society. The BJHRF is dedicated to defending human rights, achieving social justice, speaking up for future generations, and addressing the threat of climate change. And while I was here, I spoke at the IBA conference, International Bar Association, and spoke about a project of the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, which is to introduce a legal mechanism to hold corporations and CEOs and management accountable for grave violations of human rights, as well as irreparable or irreversible environmental damage. The BJHRF has launched a global campaign calling on world leaders to achieve the missing MDG target, ending violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity, to address the systemic problem of discrimination and achieve gender equality. Violence against women is one of the most prevalent human rights violations in the world. It happens in every country and at every level of society. The missing MDG target. We are at a critical time in the history of women's rights and human development. When the international community convened in 2000 to establish the Millennium Development Goal targets, they left out one critical target. They failed to address the global pandemic of violence against women and girls. The United Nations Development Fund for Women, UNIFEM, refers to the elimination of violence against women and girls as a missing MDG target. Our capacity to achieve the 8 MDG targets by 2015 is inextricably linked to our ability to tackle this missing target. The 2005 World Health Organization report, Addressing Violence Against Women and Achieving the Millennium Development Goal, stated, until recently, most government has considered violence against women, particularly domestic violence, by a husband or other intimate partner, to be a relatively minor social problem. Today, due in large part to the efforts of women organizations and the evidence provided by research, including that of the World Health Organization, violence against women is recognized as a global concern. One of the most pervasive violations of human rights in all society. It exists on a continuum form from violence perpetrated by an intimate partner to violence as a weapon of war, or violence against women and violence against women is a major threat to social and economic development. Today, 8 years later, after the WHO report, violence against women continues to undermine efforts to reach the MDG targets. According to the UN, the failure of governments to protect the rights of women continues to hinder the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women all over the world. The report also states that eradicating violence against women is particularly critical to achieving the MDG 7, which is ensure environmental sustainability, opening useful avenues for designing interventions which, in addition to preserving the environment, can empower and protect in both rural and urban settings. The consensus is clear. Our failure to address the missing MDG is preventing us from achieving the MDGs, all the other MDGs, by 2015. The 57th session of the UN Commission on the Status of Women in March 2013 affirmed that violence against women and girls is rooted in historical and structural inequality in power relations between women and men, and persists in every country in the world as a pervasive violation of the enjoyment of human rights. These pervasive human rights violations are grave injustice, and they hold us back as a society. Governments are preparing a new framework to follow the MDG target in 2015, but they intend to include this new framework, but what I feel is that we can't wait any longer. They must introduce the missing MDG of ending violence against women and girls right now. The United Nations Development Fund for Women estimate that at least 1 in every 3 women in the world has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused, and in some countries the rate is as high as 70%. Globally, violence is a greater threat to women than cancer, traffic accidents, malaria, and war combined. You know, when I began to do research to make speeches about violence against women, I was shocked when I had to write and I had to use these statistics. Can you imagine? We're not talking only about the developing world. And you will see when I tell you, because I'm going to try to give you a vision of what women are facing throughout the world, including here. Every 6 hours, a woman is killed by her partner in South Africa. 574 women and girls were murdered in Guatemala during 2012. About 60% were killed by a partner or ex-partner using firearms. Conviction rates for these murders are between less than 1% and 4%. Rife with drug and gang crime, Ciudad Juarez in Mexico has been called the murder capital of the world. Between 1993 and 2012, 1,234 women were reported murdered. No one knows how many murders have gone unreported. According to the New York Times, the women's bodies are often dumped in mass graves outside of the city, mutilated, showing signs of torture and sadistic sexual assault. In some countries, the murder of women is enshrined in law. In Iran, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia, among others, women can still be punished for the crimes of adultery or sex outside marriage by beheading, stoning, and hanged under Sharia law. Who can forget the shocking and revolting video which emerged in 2012, showing a woman in an Afghan village being shot 9 times in the back with an AK-47 as dozens of men looked on cheering. I don't know how many of you have seen that. A man was reading a verse from the Quran condemning adultery, saying, "We cannot forgive her. God tell us to finish her." The gunman continued to fire a shot into her body after she falls to the ground. In Jamama, Somalia, a young woman accused of having out-of-marriage sex was stoned to death in a football stadium in 2012. In 2008, Aisha Ibrahim Duhulo, a rape victim, was stoned to death in front of 1,000 spectators for adultery. She was 13 years of age. Amnesty International has said that the killing of Aisha demonstrated the cruelty and the inherent discrimination against women by this kind of punishment. So you see, we're talking about very young girls that are being murdered throughout the world in this way. Across India, 8,391 dowry death cases were reported in 2010. That means a bride was burned every 90 minutes, according to statistics recently released by the National Crime Records Bureau in India. These numbers indicate a culture of impunity, of tolerance, of violence against women all across the world, sometimes sanctioned by the state. It is abhorrent that in the 21st century, such a killing are allowed to continue. Violence often feeds on the widespread, insidious cultural perception that women are inferior. My friend Amartya Sen professor of economics and philosophy here at Harvard, showed the devastating consequences of the neglect of women, that the neglect of women face all over the world. In his revolutionary paper, More Than 1 Million Women Are Missing. He writes, the higher rates of disease from which women suffer, and ultimately to the relative neglect of female, especially in healthcare and medical attention. These numbers tell us quietly a terrible story of inequality and neglect leading to the excess mortality of women. You know, I know some of you will say, that's enough. I don't really want to hear more terrible statistics. But the reason why I read them and the reason why I tell you about it is because I don't think that we really believe that this is happening in the world today, and that we need to hear it over and over again, because we need to stand up and to say enough. And we must have a non-violence revolution of us women, but not just of us women and men, to say that this must stop now, once and for all. An estimate, 50 million women are missing from the Indian population, having been lost to infanticide, abortion, or child neglect. This is a huge number. It is unimaginable. In certain regions of India, the practice of aborting or killing a girl's baby in favor of a boy, is shockingly familiar, and it is already having an effect on the population. The boy-girl ratio has changed across the country. In 1991, the census figure was 947 girls to 1,000 boys. 10 years later, it had fallen to 927 girls to 1,000 boys. Today, it stands at 914 girls to every 1,000 boys, and it is still sinking. And this is not only happening in India, it's happening as well in China and in other countries. More and more girls and women are disappearing every year in India because they are considered less valuable, less culturally and economically important than men. Tragically, this attitude is not unique to India. Both women and men collude in this myth across the world with terrible consequences. Because what is important to understand, you know, this feticide, women have to agree to go through it. Yes, it's true that they are in a very vulnerable position and that they don't have the power, but they can say no. They can stand against it. Rape and sexual assault are endemic in our society. Globally, 60 million girls are sexually assaulted on the way to school every year. We live in a world where rape has long been used as a weapon of war. In 1993, I went to the former Yugoslavia to document the mass rape of Bosnian women by Serbian forces as part of their campaign of ethnic cleansing. Nothing in my experience as a human rights campaigner had prepared me for the horror and suffering I'd witnessed and the testimonies I heard. UNIFEM estimates that during the Bosnian War, up to 50,000 women were systematically raped. During the 1994 Rwanda genocide, it is estimated that between 250,000 to 500,000 women were raped. Marta Delevi was raped by a colleague in Dubai in March 2013. When she reported the rape to the police, she was given 16 months sentence for sex outside of marriage and drinking alcohol. Deleli was later pardoned by the state, but as Rory Donaghy, a spokesman for the Emirates Center for Human Rights, told the Washington Post, her pardon still suggests that she was somehow guilty of a crime. Until laws are reformed, victims of sexual violence in the UAE will continue to suffer in this way and will likely see more cases as this one. Under Sharia law, a conviction for rape can require either a confession or the testimony of 4 adult male witnesses. Rape victims in Afghanistan have also been jailed for adultery. In one case, in 2011, a woman was forced to marry her rapist. Every year, 800,000 people are trafficked across national borders, the majority for sexual exploitation, modern-day slavery, and prostitution. 79% of them are women and girls. If trafficking within countries is included in the total world figures, official US estimates indicate that 2 to 4 million people are trafficked every year. 100 to 140 million girls all over the world, predominantly in Africa, have been subjected to female genital mutilation. We can be sure that these numbers are only the tip of the iceberg. Much violence against women goes unreported on all fields. One tragic case last December in India, which has been widely reported, is that of Nirbhaya, a 23-year-old student returning home from the cinema one evening was violently and repeatedly gun raped on a bus, sustaining horrific internal injuries. Afterward, she was thrown naked and unconscious from the moving vehicle. The student was nicknamed Nirbhaya, meaning fearless. In the Indian press, for her determination to live and see her attackers prosecuted, Nirbhaya died of her injuries on December 29, 2012. Something changed in me that day. When I learned about Nirbhaya, I felt sick and revolted when I read of her suffering. It reaffirmed my determination to speak out against violence against women. I was encouraged, though, by the reaction to Nirbhaya's case in India. It galvanized public opinion. Women and men stood demanding legislation to protect women. In some ways, I felt as if the reaction of some of the women in India were even more courageous than some of our own reaction, because they really went out on the street and demanded that legislation needed to be changed, and men went along with them. The Indian Committee on Amendments to Criminal Law, headed by Justice G.S. Verma, produced a remarkable report containing comprehensive analysis and recommendations, not only for improving responses and procedures for sexual assault in India, but overall strategies to improve the status of women. Sadly, Justice Verma died in April, shortly after it was completed. The report reveals corruption in the police and the government, an institutionalized apathy towards violence and deeply ingrained misogyny. It states unequivocally that the police are involved in trafficking of children and that authentic figures of missing children in India are not available for obvious reasons of the complicity of law enforcement agency. Children have been driven into forced labor, sex abuse, sexual exploitation, as well as made victims of illegal organ trade. The report condemns the demeaning and inhumane treatment rape victims sometimes receive in India at the hands of the police and doctors. In the past, part of the medical examination after rape in India was an assessment of whether a victim was previously used to sexual intercourse. I imagine that that is a way to define whether a woman was or not a virgin. Even after the wording was struck out from the law, some doctors still attempt to ascertain the laxity of the vaginal muscle, which is commonly referred to as the two-finger test, and to determine the state of the hymen. The Verma Committee is adamant that such illegal practice must be stamped out. The report is a call to action. It proposes amendment to the law to better protect women and girls and to promote gender equality. It calls for the criminalization of marital rape and for the government to bring sexual crime by members of the armed forces under the jurisdiction of criminal law. It makes recommendations to address the deeply entrenched gender bias in the Indian police force. It overhauls medical and forensic procedures for victims of sexual assault and suggests provisions of trafficked children and vulnerable women. Unfortunately, the Indian government has so far failed to adopt many of these important recommendations. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and his government must take immediate action. Otherwise, as the final paragraph of the Commission report states, it will be an exercise on futility. You know, and when I talk about what it says in the report, I've been in India to document the issue of HIV/AIDS, and I've seen, and as well on children that were trafficked. And the sad thing that I witnessed was how the police was complicitous with some of the madams of the brothels where this girl, you know, had been brought to. But let's talk about the US. The developed world is not exempt. A sexual assault takes place in the US every 2 minutes. Nearly 1.3 million women are raped every year in America. Almost half, 43% of the victims, are under 18. 54% of sexual assaults are not reported to the police, and 97% of rapists will never spend a day in jail. And while, of course, people of any gender can rape or be raped, 9 out of every 10 rapes that occur in the United States involve a female victim and a male perpetrator, according to the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Report, RAINN. Some countermeasures have been developed. Congress passed the Violence Against Women Act in 1994, which provide a record-breaking $1.6 billion to address issues of violence against women. The Office on Violence Against Women was created within the US Justice Department in 1995. In 2012, President Obama issued an executive order to create an interagency working group to implement the new United States strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally. In 2013, the International Violence Against Women Act, or IVAWA, will come before Congress for the 4th time. The legislation was developed by Amnesty International USA. Futures Without Violence and Women Thrive Worldwide, with input from more than 40 international and 150 US NGOs. This groundbreaking bill will provide support to victims, help prevent violence, and hold the perpetrators accountable, and encourage women economic empowerment in the US and overseas. IVAWA will make gender-based violence a prevention of permanent US diplomatic and foreign policy priority, says Christina Finch, Managing Director for the Women Human Rights Program at Amnesty International USA. The bill has been defeated in the past because the Republicans wanted it to contain restrictions on abortion. Writing our social and legal institution of bias is a painful, slow process. From 1927 to 2013, the definition of rape in the FBI Uniform Crime Reporting System, UCR, was the carnal knowledge of a female forcefully and against her will. This antiquated definition excluded many types of rape. In January 2013, after consistent lobbying from NGOs, particularly the Women Law Project, the Justice Department finally expanded the definition to include all forms of rape. The penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And I thought a lot about whether I should read you what he said, but I thought since this is a public, it's the Justice Department who has put it out, that it was important that I let you know what he said in it. The redefinition of rape in the IUCN is a step in the right direction, but it is one that should have been taken years ago. We must scrutinize legislations and the law. We must ensure that it's fit for the 21st century, that it protects women from violence and sexual violence and promotes gender equality. We're not doing enough, and we're not doing it fast enough. An estimate 26,000 people in the US military were victims of sexual assault in 2012, a substantial increase from an estimate 19,000 in 2010. Two-thirds of female victims do not report the assault against them. Of those two-thirds, 62% suffer retaliation for reporting it. Representative Jackie Spire made an alarming statement in House floor, a speech last year. The women in our military are more likely to be raped or assaulted by colleagues than they are to be killed by the enemy. It's quite a shocking statement when you think about it. In some colleges, fraternity cultures, rape particularly involving alcohol and drugs, is frighteningly normalized. 19% of undergraduate women in the US reported experiencing complete or attempted sexual assault since entering college. One of the most shocking aspects of the Steubenville trial was the casual attitude displayed by some towards the crime. Pictures and videos of the rape circulated on social media and around the high school for days before any action was taken. I remember because I have a Twitter account, and I found out about very early on and was quite shocked by the reaction to what was taking place. Text messages were found on dozens of phones describing the rape, and in what the New York Times called a real-time accounting of the assault. Former sex crime prosecutor Alice Vax says, all campuses are still so rape tolerant that the most likely outcome for a campus sex crime victim is that she leaves school. There is a culture of silence and shame surrounding sexual assault. Many women are afraid to speak out in cases of rape and domestic abuse. I was encouraged to hear about the work of the Oh Harvard Can Do Better, and I don't know if any of you are here, a campus group which is working to bridge the gap between policy and practice in administrative response to sexual assault here at Harvard. Being assaulted by a partner is the most common kind of violence experienced by women. Nearly 40% of women killed worldwide were slain by an intimate partner, according to the UN. Those who perpetrate violence against women should be prosecuted with the full weight of the law. But how much weight does the law carry? Not much in some cases. Domestic violence is acceptable, even legal in some countries. More than 600 million women live in countries where domestic violence is not considered a crime, according to the UN. The highest court in the United Arab Emirates ruled in 2010 that under Sharia law, a man is permitted to beat his wife and children as long as he leaves no mark. A judge in Saudi Arabia stated in 2009 that a man has a right to hit a wife who spends money wastefully. Even in countries where violence against women is illegal, spousal abuse, rape, and sexual violence are often ingrained in the culture. The numbers aren't encouraging. The more I learned about the issue, the more shocked and disturbed I am by the global failure to address the problem of violence against women and girls. It is systemic and institutionalized. And it is systemic and institutionalized not only in India. And that's what we need to understand. Because often when we talk about violence against women, we think, well, it happens in the developing world. It happened in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. But that is not the case. We need to realize what's going on in the world and what's going on here and in Europe and in England. When I spoke on violence against women, this is and I thought, I haven't mentioned this before. I was asked to speak at a Google Zeitgeist conference in London earlier this year. And they asked me to prepare the speech, and they said to me that the statistics were, you know, a little bit too hard. Could I have a positive ending? And I thought, why not? You know, let's have a positive ending because most of the people who were there were men, you know, because, you know, what businessmen and could do in their own, you know, in their own firms, you know, to support women, to support the wife, to support the daughter. The organizers tried to censor my speech. They wanted me to soft pedal the statistics because they said the audience was mainly men, and the organizers thought they weren't ready for the shocking facts. But what was wrong and where they made a mistake was that they said to me, well, we're going to have a conversation with the journalists, and we did. And I took a few minutes, read a lot of my statistics, and remembered them by heart. And when it came the time, he asked me one question. So I gave the speech from that one question and remember the important statistics that I needed to say to those men, with the majority men. But what was very interesting was I went to dinner that night, and men came to me and they said, Mrs. Jagger, we're so glad that you gave that, you know, that speech, and that you told us about the statistics, because we were totally unaware that that is happening in the world, and we need to know more and to know what we need to do about it. One of the most shameful examples of gender bias, of this institutionalized violence against women, is in some law governing reproductive right. And sure, why should I be talking about reproductive rights? But the HB2 bill passed by the Texas legislature in a special session on July 12, 2013, requires doctors to have admitting privilege at a hospital within 30 miles in order to perform abortions. A challenge. In Texas, the largest state in the US, abortion clinics will have to qualify as ambulatory surgical centers. Of Texas' 42 abortion clinics, only 5 fulfill this criteria and will remain open. This restriction poses serious danger to women's health. The World Health Organization finds that making abortion illegal or hard to obtain results only in a rise of unsafe abortion. The American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG, published an open letter to Texas lawmakers on July 9th, and it reads, "The fact is that this bill will not help protect the health of any women in Texas. Instead, this bill will harm women's health in a very clear way. Planned Parenthood, the UCLU, the Center for the Reproductive Rights, and their Texas affiliates together have filed a civil suit, Planned Parenthood versus Abbott, challenging the restrictions. Jennifer Dalvin, director of the UCLU Reproductive Freedom Project, told the Guardian newspaper, the real purpose of this law is to make it impossible for women to get abortion. Texas Governor Rick Perry has said that his goal is to make abortion a thing of the past. Laws against abortion constitute a serious threat to women's life in some countries. And let me tell you, I'm not advocating abortion. I was too brought up in a Catholic convent. But I feel that women have the right to decide for themselves. But I want to tell you about some of the consequences of the laws that exist in some countries. For example, in El Salvador, and I know that there is a young woman from El Salvador here, a young woman known as Beatriz, suffering from lupus and kidney failure, petitioned the Supreme Court for permission to have an abortion. The fetus had no chance of surviving, and Beatriz would very likely die if she continued with the pregnancy. According to doctors, that's what they said, that she wouldn't that she probably was likely to die. Yet the Supreme Court denied her an abortion, and it was only after an outcry that Beatriz was given a C-section. El Salvador's law prohibits all abortion, even when a woman's health is at risk. Beatriz and any doctors who terminated her pregnancy would have faced arrest and criminal charges. Since abortion was made illegal in 1998, 628 Salvadorian women have been jailed for having abortions, according to the Central American Women Network. Similar cases can be found in Malta, Chile, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic, anywhere abortion is illegal. The European Court on Human Rights and the Inter-American Court on Human Rights have ruled that such denials of care are a violation of women's human rights. Abortion was legal in Nicaragua for nearly 100 years. However, Daniel Ortega changed his stance during his election campaign in order to get the support of Cardinal Obando Bravo. Under the new anti-abortion laws, which came into effect in 2006, all pregnancies, including ectopic pregnancies and pregnancies from rape or incest, must be carried to term, regardless of the consequences. Cancer sufferers must give birth before receiving treatment. It is unconscionable and inhumane. Amnesty International calls this chilling indifference to women and girls. But now I want to talk to you about the Army. Lieutenant General David Morris, Australia's Chief of Army, issued an inspiring statement on June 14. In response to accusations of demeaning, explicit, and profane behavior towards women in the armed force, I urge you to watch it if you haven't seen it already. He says, "Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploit their colleagues have no place in this army. I will be ruthless in ridding the army of people who cannot live up to its value. And I need every one of you to support me in achieving this. If you're not up to it, find something else to do with your life. There is no place for you among this band of brothers and sisters." I was so inspired when I read what he said. World leaders need to be as clear and committed as Lieutenant General David Morrison to challenge this discriminatory attitude which has bred a global pandemic of violence against women and girls. In some countries, discrimination against women, as I have said before, is enshrined in law, and it persists in others, supposedly egalitarian nations, veiled, underhand, unspoken. Worldwide education is fraught with gender bias. 70 million girls each year are denied the right to the most basic education. 64% of the 774 million illiterate adults worldwide are women. Education is critical to emancipation of women and girls from poverty, in achieving gender equality and towards the creation of a free and equal world. All countries must achieve gender parity in education. No one does better than Malala Yousafzai, who risked her life speaking out for women's education. She's the young girl from Pakistan. Her commitment and vision have earned her a Nobel Prize nomination at the age of 16. I can think of no one more deserving. There are too few women in positions of power today. Of the 190 heads of states in the world, 17 are women. Of all the people in parliament in the world, 21% are women. In the corporate sector, only 16% of those at boardroom level are women. This year, 2013, is the 50th anniversary of the passing into law of the Equal Pay Act by John F. Kennedy. This historic piece of legislation states, "No employer having employees subject to any provision of this section shall be discriminated." within any establishment in which such employees are employed, between employees and the basics of sex by paying wages to employees in such establishment at a rate less than the rate of which he pays wages to employees of the opposite sex in such establishment for equal work. This law was supposed to achieve equal pay for women in the US. 50 years later, we have yet to achieve economic justice for women. Women are still paid less than men in this country and everywhere else in the entire world. Discrimination is not merely a moral evil, it is explicitly against the law. We have to be tough on institutions and business, employers everywhere. Those who are in the greatest position of responsibility have a duty to be stringent, to observe the law, to pay men and women equally, and make the workplace fair. President Obama's administration is pushing Congress to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, which will make wage disparity more transparent. This is a good start, but it's tragic that we need better ways of examining the ways in which we're failing to achieve justice. I'm sure I don't need to remind the people in this room of the great collective lobbying individual campaigning power that we have, even with large multinational corporations. Never underestimate the importance of bearing witness. Twitter is a great tool for social justice. If you witness injustice, you can say something, tweet about this, put it on Facebook, put it on Google+, put it on LinkedIn, and let others know about it. I am on Twitter at Bianca Jagger. It is an invaluable tool to my human rights and environmental campaign. Gender equality and equal pay are enshrined in national and international law, but they are not the everyday reality for many women all over the world. It is time to eliminate discrimination of all kinds once and for all, from our institutions, governments, academic, financial institutions, from all infrastructures, to ensure women employees are fairly treated, and lastly, but not means least, to employ more women. The global employment rate of women stands at 52.7%. There are more women working now today than at any other time in our history. There has also been a sharp rise in recent years of the number of women looking for work. A study by the Pew shows that since 2007, before the recession officially began, the numbers of mothers waiting to work full-time increased from 20% in 2007 to 32% in 2012. I could cite hundreds of studies examining this problem. One recent study by Georgetown University Center on Education in the Workforce found that women earn less at all degree levels, even when they work as much as men. On average, women who work full-time, full year, earn 25% less than men, even at a similar education level. And it is so important for me to be speaking here, because changes can come out of this great institution. And we can force those changes. We can demand that those changes take place. We are deluding ourselves if we think we have eradicated discrimination from the so-called developed and enlightened world. Have they forgotten? You know, I wanted to tell you about a funny incident in England, which tells you something about how we view women. I think that somewhere under a veneer of Western capitalism and egalitarianism embedded deep in the culture, there lurks an institutionalized belief that women are inferior, and a wish to diminish them, to ignore their achievements, belittle them, and pay them less. And this desire, the belief, is sometimes perpetrated by the media. I was astonished when many UK newspapers, including The Times, The Telegraph, and the Daily Mail, carry headlines stating that Andy Murray was the first British winner of the Wimbledon Tennis Championship in 77 years. I said to myself, have they forgotten that there were 4 other British single champions in the past 77 years. Dorothy Round Little won the women's single in 1937. Angela Mortimer won in 1961. And Anne Haydon-Jones in 1969. And Virginia Wade won in 1977. Apparently, as women, the victories don't count. Achieving the Millennium Development Goal will be impossible if we don't address the MDG target, where leaders should make eliminating violence against women and girls a priority now. We need to begin today. We can't afford to wait for 2 years for the new 2015 framework. Governments should commit to achieving this missing MDG target. We cannot ignore the problems of violence and discrimination against women and girls any longer. We owe it to women all over the world who are suffering violence, persecution, and injustice. Violence against women and girls is a crime against each and every one of us. It is not only we, but our daughters and granddaughters, and our great-granddaughters, because I'm going to have one, who will suffer. By doing nothing, we jeopardize their future. No more silence. Let's speak up. Let's call for an end to violence against women and girls and the culture of impunity. Let's achieve the missing MDG target. And I make a call, and I appeal to the President, to Barack Obama, to perhaps be the one who says that we should include the missing MDG target. Thank you very much.
Quite wonderful. Let's sit down and have a conversation.
I hope it was not too tough and too many statistics.
First of all, I want to thank you, Bianca Jagger, on behalf of all of us here at Harvard, but also more generally in Boston, for paying us this visit. I know that you've been having a very busy day with the Leadership Council, talking to lawyers about how there could be a remedy to this situation. I must also thank you very much for giving us such an anthology, a global anthology of statistical evidence, which put together like this is extraordinarily helpful. The statistics, of course, are national, and many of the bodies that, for remedy that you refer to are international. And I was wondering whether you could help us to think of the ways in which the connection between national governments and national campaigns and international government and international campaigns and international governmental organizations could really work together, and how in your own experience you might have seen this kind of bipartisan cooperation creating a very positive effect in the campaigning which you have been so vigorous about.
You see, the more I learned and the more I see the statistics and the condition in which women live and what they are facing throughout the world, the more I believe that in order to make real changes, infrastructural changes, we need to introduce legal mechanism in the law to protect women. It is only then, it is only when we will have that we will be able to make real difference. But there is something else as well that I want to say, that violence against women and discrimination against women is not only an issue that we can point fingers at men. We women, we must understand that the prejudice that exists in our society comes from us as well, come from the way we bring up our children. It's all this prejudice that are so deeply entrenched in the way we think, in the way we bring up our daughters, in the way that we behave towards them. So we will only be able to achieve these changes once we ourselves, we understand what is wrong with what we are doing. And we are seeing some improvements. And that is, and that's what it was so important, what happened in India. Somehow it was a catalyst, what took place in India and the way the Indian people reacted, that make other people think we have to do something about it. Of course, we've been doing something about it, but I think we need to be more vocal. We need to be more forceful. We need to be more determined. We need to believe that we can make a difference. We can be empowered. We can make a difference. I don't know why we doubt that. You know, if we did, if we were empowered, if we demanded, they will have to make those changes. And it is not just here in America, in Europe, but in those countries as well. We need to give our support to women which are in a more weak position that we are in the US and in Europe, to be able to help them so that we can achieve changes and that we can one day achieve gender equality and put an end to violence against women and girls.
I want to ask you one more question before opening up to the audience, who I'm sure are, you know, waiting to have a conversation with you. You know, you say we must be more vocal, and I completely agree with that. But most campaigns,
yes,
in many issues, most revolutionary campaigns, and what you're talking about is a kind of revolution in process. It's taken some time. Campaigns come together with a spirit of resistance to oppression, but they also require, at the same time, a certain pleasure, a certain joy with which they can, you know, which they can proceed. And when you talked about the vocal, I was thinking about the various campaigns by musicians against racism, for development and for the whole Africa campaign and so on. Now, you have experienced at some part of your life this whole musical culture, and I wanted to ask you whether you thought that in the field of culture, things like music, which have been so important for the slave songs, for revolutionary songs, peasant movements, do you think music could play a major role in creating this kind of a new consciousness?
I am a great believer that artists, musicians can make a difference in the world. And in fact, the event that I had, the last event my foundation had, was called Arts for Human Rights. So yes, you know, we need to have a nonviolent resistance and you know, it should be musicians and artists and writers and all of them to be part of it. I mean, we need to have a support from all walks of life. I mean, of course, not only intellectuals and musicians, but everyone. You know, if every woman and man on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google+, decided that this is something that we need to achieve, we will make a difference.
Yeah, but you see, in the process of the campaign,
yes,
we don't get satisfaction very often. You know, we fail at times, and we've got to go again and again. I can get no satisfaction. You know, we go on and back, and I was wondering how. No, seriously, but I was seriously wondering, how do you use culture and music to keep your spirits up when you are a part of the dismal record that you provided here of statistics? Do you think culture gives you that sort of strength to move on? You talk about law, you know, but access to the law is difficult.
Many things give me, you know, the impetus and the strength, culture, and the support of other people, the fact that I know that women want this to happen, and as well the fact that I remember my mother and what she went through, and what I said to myself, I swear to myself, I was not going to allow to be treated as a second-rate citizen because of my gender. So the many things, you know, it is, yes, I welcome the support of musicians, of artists, of intellectuals, of writers. It is wonderful because that is part of my life and part of something I love. And then I want to combine the things that I love into the work that I do as well. And sometimes, you know, I'm concerned that I have to bring all these very dry statistics to the audience, but I feel I have to, you know, because I want to give a global picture of what's going on. And I hope that they don't feel overwhelmed by them, because I don't do it to be overwhelmed. It's only so that we say, enough, you know, enough is enough, let's stand up and declare a non-violence war against it.
Well, Bianca Jagger, you bring these dry statistics to us with great elegance and beauty. Thank you very much for your speech. Let's open up to the audience. Yes?
I just want to say one small thing, is that many of what I discussed today, I have a blog in the Huffington Post, and I have written about women's rights and environmental issues and you can find it in there. And one little thing, I didn't see the massacre of students. I witnessed it and learned about it. So, because I like to be precise, just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much. There was a hand there. Please say who you are and then ask the question.
Okay. My name is Iyabo Obasanjo. I'm originally from Nigeria. I'm a fellow here at Advanced Leadership Fellow at Harvard. Thank you for your overview of the status of women across the globe. It was very, very, you know, it was very, very sad to hear it again, although we know a lot of it. When you were commenting, you mentioned that it's important for us women how we raise our daughters, and I think that is very important, but I think it's more important actually how we raise our sons, because I think that a lot of times it is that, because we want our sons to succeed so much, we give them all these impressions. So I just wanted to add that to, we as women, it's not only how we raise our daughters, but we also need to raise our sons to be sensitive and to understand the status of women and what they need to do. And also, I wondered, you didn't mention the issue of child marriage, but that is also a very, very important issue in many of the cultures and the countries you mentioned. So it's not only the actual abuse of the girls, but the fact that families also are mothers in a lot of cases, and actually are part of the problem. And even genital mutilation, it's been found that women, mothers, are the ones insisting that their daughters go through this horror. Thank you.
So what is your question?
Yes.
My question...
That's you know, you've made an interesting little speech about what was done, but what is your question?
I guess just to thank her.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Could we have the mic here, please?
Firstly, I'd like to also...
I think you need to talk.
Sorry, my name is Christine Esau, and I'm an Australian visitor to Harvard. Firstly, I'd like to thank you, Bianca, for being so passionate and with such integrity about what you're talking about. As you didn't witness the massacre, I wonder whether you could tell us a story, perhaps, about what it was that perhaps 30 years ago, you said 30 years ago, that, that instigated or acted as a catalyst for your genuine interest in this. You said you've been...
what inspired me to do what I do?
You've been very active for the last 30 years, so I wondered whether there was a particular incident that served as a catalyst that you remember.
Well, two things. You know, often journalists say to me, or people say to me, you know, what make you change in your lives? Because they think that, you know, I changed after my divorce. But I tried to explain to them that I was born in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is a country that lived under 43 years of a dictatorship. And my mother was not a politician, she was a housewife, but she was very political, and through her I really understood as a child what it meant to live under an oppressive government, what it meant not to have freedom of expression. And then growing up as well, I was aware of what the Somoza regime was doing to Nicaragua. But there are some turning points in my life. One of them was when I came back after the earthquake in 1972, and I went to look for my parents, and I couldn't, you know, I had no way of communicating with them. So we went to Nicaragua, and we drove to Managua, and it was almost completely destroyed, and there was a terrible stench of flesh, of burned flesh. And I couldn't find my parents, and I put an announcement on the radio, and I found them, fortunately. But as well, you know, Homie mentioned, I was surprised that he had found that out. You know, I realized to what extent the corruption that existed in Nicaragua by the Somoza regime, and how they misappropriated the aid that they were receiving from the US and other countries. And this little incident of how only the people who had a red flag on the door, on the door, were being given food and water, but as well that aid was being put into warehouses. And then I came back to the United States, and I asked the Stones to do a concert, a relief concert for the victims in Nicaragua, and it was one of the first, and it was in 1973 in Los Angeles, and I went back to Nicaragua, and I wanted that we use that money to build a small clinic, but of course the Somoza regime and Mrs. Somoza, who was the head of the Social Security in Nicaragua and who was building a hospital, didn't want, you know, that a hospital be built or a clinic that will highlight the fact that they have misappropriated the fund and that they were so corrupt. So I knew already about corruption and about oppression, but I understood the details of how that oppression and the corruption, you know, what it was doing to the people of Nicaragua, especially under, you know, after that terrible tragedy. And then the next thing was, after my divorce, I was asked to go and document it was in 1981, and I was asked to go with a congressional fact-finding mission to a refugee camp in Honduras, in the border with El Salvador. And at that time, the United States was funding the government of El Salvador, who was really oppressing and committing terrible human rights abuses against their people. So I was told that the death squads were crossing the river from El Salvador into Honduras, and they were entering with the acquiescence of the Honduran army into the refugee camp, and that they were coming to abduct the refugees and that they were bringing them back to El Salvador to be killed. As it happens, when I arrived, there was a phone call to my phone and says, "Bianca, come right away. The death squads are in the refugee camp." It was called Colamoncawa. So when I arrived, there were, I imagine, you know, I think about, you know, 35 or 40 death squads. They were wearing bandanas. They were carrying M16. Some of them had military boots, and they were abducting, or where they were getting ready to abduct, about 35 or 40 refugees, male, all men. And they were tying the thumbs behind their back in the manner that they used to do at the time. So we talked among ourselves. We were 5 members of this delegation and the relief workers, and we decided to follow them. Of course, all we had was camera, and we followed them along a riverbed for about 30 minutes. You know, you always, it's all very not exact when you look back at things, and even though I have written about. And we ran behind them with cameras, taking photographs and screaming that we were going to denounce their crimes to the world, and that and at one point they turned around and they pointed an M16 at us, and we screamed, "You will have to kill us all." But we weren't alone. There were all the mothers and daughters and the people in the refugee camp that were coming along with us. So we were a lot. And we said, "You will have to kill us all." And they talked among themselves, and for some unbeknown reason, they turned around, let the refugee go, and went back to El Salvador. And I understood the importance of bearing witness, how a small act of courage can make a difference. I came back to the United States, and I testified before the Subcommittee on Inter-American Affairs, talked about the regionalization of the war, because it was at a time when the beginning of the Contra War, in Nicaragua, they were training, hadn't exactly started, but they were training the Contras in Honduras. And it sort of propelled me into a new world, because suddenly I was testifying, suddenly I had been confronting the death squads and understood what was happening in Central America. And from then on, it was an inevitable course that I had to be engaged in being a human rights defender.
Thank you, Bianca. My name is Sandra Gutierrez. I come from El Salvador. I just met you at the elevator. And I'm doing urban planning at MIT here. I thank you very much, deep from my heart, for all the things you have been sharing about my country. I have two questions for you. The first one is in relationship with lobbying for these very traditional groups that are still very powerful in our Central American societies. Do you know that in the case of Beatriz, they have been lobbying very strong to keep that abortion law still prevailing in El Salvador? Are you, with your foundation, doing something in relationship with this lobbying from traditional groups in Central America? And the second question is about the leadership from very strong women that live in the slums in our cities. 50% of the metropolitan areas in Salvador are slums. And I work with people in the slums, and I have seen the power of those women living and working there. I don't know whether your foundation is also working with women that are struggling for life every day in these areas, that can be a very powerful civil society force to endorse changes towards just this objective of getting more visibility over women's human rights.
I didn't really understand your second question clearly. What was your second? It was a group of women that do what?
Yeah, well, there is very powerful force of women that are living in the slums, in very poor, downgraded areas in our cities, and they are very well organized. They normally are leaders in their own communities, and I have been working with them, and I have witnessed the power of change for some very simple things like getting water, getting access to provision in their school for their children, etc. Different aspects in their daily life. So I was wondering whether, are you aware of these very local civil organizations that are being pushed by women in cities, and if you are working with them?
I am aware of the work and how effective they are, even though, as you say, they are women who live in the slums. I recently, early this year, I visited your country, and I was with the UN and with you, First Lady, and visited the project Ciudad Mujer, which I was so impressed by. I don't know if you feel the same way as I do, but it was absolutely a pioneer project where women who have lived and have great difficulties, they can go into these institutions that were created by the First Lady, and that helped them prepare them to be able to face up to life of women who have been victims of domestic violence or rape and that teaches them as well a profession. But she has used all the institutions of the government within Ciudad Mujer, or City of Women, to be able to help them and to get them ready to face up to the future in a different way that when they enter. But I mean, but I didn't really meet the groups of women, but I know about the work, yes.
The question is your foundation also working with women of that cadre?
Well, she's asking me specifically in El Salvador. No, I'm working with the UN to try to see if that project, Ciudad Mujer, can be reproduced in other countries around the world, and in particularly in Latin America.
Please.
My name is David Sanderson. I'm a visiting professor here at the Graduate School of Design working in humanitarian aid. I wanted to say what a real privilege it was to hear you speak this evening, and I was really inspired by your story of bearing witness. And I wanted to simply ask you if you had some other examples from your experience of what really works.
Well, you know, I've been, I have visited, or I have been in, since I felt that it was important to bear witness. I was criticized at first, you know, for saying that it was important to bear witness. I think the perception has changed, and people understand and feel, and the media feel that it is an important thing to do. And I went to, of course, I've been to Guatemala, and I was in Bosnia, and I documented the mass rapes against women, and as well I evacuated children out of Bosnia. And I went to Iraq just before the war, and I've been to Afghanistan, and I think it is important. I mean, what is important is, it is not just anyone, you know, to say that, yes, let's go to Iraq or Afghanistan, or to be a photo opportunity like sometimes is the case. But if somebody knows what they're doing, and if they can come back and tell a first-hand story, it is very important. I don't like to talk, and for example, she asked me a question I cannot answer because I don't have first-hand knowledge of that. If you can be witness and you can really tell the story of people. I just spoke at the International Bar Association on the case of what Chevron, then Texaco, did in Ecuador, and how it did irreparable damage to the water sources. And what I saw, the stories that they told me, the women who had a spontaneous abortion, women who were people who were suffering from cancer. And when I went to the AGM of Chevron to tell the shareholders at the shareholders meeting what I saw, it is different if I had read it and if I can tell them I was there. I witnessed that. I spoke to these people. I'm bringing their message to you. It is totally different. And I will do it again and again. Of course, now I have a slip disc on my back. It's not so easy for me to go to war fronts, but in whatever I am able to do it, I will continue to do it.
May I ask you to tell the story of Vedanta?
Sure.
Not the religious text, but the Indian corporation, because that's a very important issue, I think.
Yes.
Not only environmentally, but also in terms of cultural preservation and intangible heritage. All those things come together as part of the millennial goals.
Yes.
And I would be very grateful if you could tell that story.
Sure. I work, part of my or a very important aspect of my work is working with indigenous people. And I believe that they are the best protectors of the environment. And so I was asked, a young ActionAid, because I work very closely with other organizations, with Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, ActionAid, and other local grassroots organizations. And they brought this young man who was going to testify at an AGM of Vedanta, which is a big mining company, which is headquartered in England, but it's really Indian. And he came to talk to me, and he was very articulate. He came to talk to me about a project that this mining company had in India, in Orissa, and they wanted to mine bauxite. And there is a tribe called the Kon tribe. And the Kon are they're divided into 3 or 4 groups of different Kon. But there is one, the Dongria Kon. They live in this paradisiacal place. They live in a mountain that they regarded as a sacred place. They regarded this mountain as their god. And there is a pristine rainforest. And at the top of this mountain, there are stones where the bauxite is. And so these stones gather water, and this water feeds to 3 main rivers in India, not only in Orissa, but in other states. But of course, if they were to be given the go-ahead from the government, it would have destroyed not only this pristine rainforest, it would have destroyed the cultural heritage of the Kon people, and it would have impaired, or it would have affected the water that was going not just to Orissa, to other states. So I went with him to the shareholders meeting, and I said, I will visit you. You know, of course, you take a 9 hours flight to Delhi, I think, and from Delhi I took a 9 hours on an overnight train. Trains in India, you have to make them, and then we were on by road, and then the vehicle where we were went on a ditch, and then I got on. Somebody gave me a ride on a motorcycle, and we arrived in this extraordinary place.
And then you got a slip disc.
Huh?
And then you got a slip disc.
No, I did not.
I was only joking. Sorry.
I was perfectly okay, and then I arrived at this extraordinary place, and I was so moved because their determination that they were ready to die for their mountain and for the God, you know, and they persuaded me. And so what I did is that I did a campaign to the Prime Minister, letter campaign to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of the Environment, to the Chief Minister, who was an old friend of mine before he became a Chief Minister, when he was a nice cultural person and who was not interested in anything, but he was completely different when he became the Prime Minister of Orissa. And then I went as well and I met with this extraordinary Minister of the Environment called Jaran Ramesh. And I met him, and I thought that he was going to throw stones at me when he saw me at a UN conference. And I said, you know, I want to talk to you about the Kon and Vedanta. And he said that he was so glad that I was bringing attention to what was happening to the Kon people. And I wrote in the Observer, in the Guardian, I wrote in the Huffington Post in India, and went to, what I believe is that we as NGOs, we need to not only fight from outside, but from within. So I attend the shareholders meeting of these companies. I attended Chevron before, I attended Vedanta, I had questions, and and I tried to talk to the chairman you know, and the honor, Mr. Agarwal, who kindly recently sent me an address as to where I could treat my slip disc, and I wrote him a very kind and nice letter thanking him for that. But the end of the story is that it went through all the procedures, and finally it went to the Supreme Court. And of course, there were all the indigenous people fighting this giant company. And the Supreme Court ruled that it was up to the Grand Sabha, or the council of the Khond, who should decide whether they wanted Vedanta to mine in the mountain or not. And of course, they came from miles, walked and got together and voted, you know, unanimously to reject Vedanta. And at the last shareholders meeting, it was one of the rare moments when we feel that perhaps what we do, and it's not just me alone, it was Amnesty International and ActionAid and all the grassroots organization, that it was a victory for indigenous people. And we felt that we had done something that had a positive outcome. And it's rare, you know, we don't have positive outcomes every day. So it was wonderful that we were able to contribute in some way for the Khond tribes to defend and to preserve their cultural heritage and their culture and their mountain.
Story of both of militancy as well as inspiration. And I want to take a final question. Oh, there are two questions, three questions, good. One from here, yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I just wanted to ask, and this
Tell us who you are.
Good segue. So,
if you can come a little bit forward, because there is an echo and I have difficulties really hearing.
Okay. Hi.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think could be the role for a policy developed by Indigenous people and girls in addressing violence against women and girls?
What role could they play in developing a policy?
Or what do you think about policy designed by girls and Indigenous people for addressing the issue of violence against women and girls?
It's a very good question. I can vow for their policies with regards to protecting the environment. I will be lying if I pretended that I know how they feel vis-a-vis of this issue and whether they could define, but it's something that I will bring up to them and bring up to you. One thing that I want to tell you about it is that Indigenous people in general believe in a community, you know, and which is the thing different to us. That, you know, they don't very often they don't have that sense of possessions and ownership, you know, and they share everything they have. But I wouldn't like to forward and say that I know what the answer is to that question.
My name is Susie Galler, and I represent Women and Girls Lead, which is a 50-film, 5-year campaign from public television addressing many of the issues that Bianca's talked about tonight, and others about dedicated specifically to women and girls and leadership, and trying to really engage in conversation both nationally and globally about these issues. And we are very honored to have Bianca joining our leadership council and helping us work on these issues. And I have to tell you, we've been working together now for a few weeks and really getting to know each other and talking about these issues. But hearing you tonight and really getting a sense of the incredible courage. I mean, I've read all of this, but hearing it from you, really getting a sense of the courage it takes to do what you've been doing. I'm so moved, and I'm so honored to be working with you. And I wanted to know if you might want to say something about the importance and the role of media in addressing some of these issues as well.
Well, I believe so much in the importance of media and in the importance of the media of films and documentary that I studied political science as a young woman in France, in Paris. That as an adult, when I was campaigning against the Contra, I went back to NYU to study filmmaking because I wanted to do a documentary, because I felt the only way I can persuade Americans that we're not going to cross the Rio Grande, come from Nicaragua, and that we are a threat to the United States is perhaps to go to Nicaragua and do a documentary so that you understand. At the time, Nicaragua was I think we were about 1.5 million or maybe 2 million people. And when I used to hear Reagan say that, I just didn't know what I could do. So I'm a great believer in the power of media, in the power of film, and the power of documentaries that can convey images and ideas and concepts and convey the tragedy of people better than anybody can do by speaking or by writing sometimes.
My name is Egon Chalakian. I'm an alumni of the law school class of '72. On 2 separate occasions, 10 years or so back, I had been invited to visit the Maquiladora case in Mexico.
The which case?
Maquiladora murders. Do you recall that?
¿Maquilladoras de qué? ¿De dónde? Which one? En Ciudad Juárez. Ah, in Ciudad Juárez.
I had been invited by the Mexican government and the U.S. government to spend some time and just meet with people in that neighborhood. And this was not my profession for the most part. But I walked away and have pondered that. I met a number of the mothers of the victims. And I walked away on 2 separate occasions, and I thought it's interesting. Whenever I pursue a conversation on the subject with people in the know, it falls off the map very quickly. Everything from the federal authorities in this country and the Mexican federal authorities. I can raise a subject and say, by the way, I visited this body and the parts didn't fit. They bury the bodies and this leg doesn't go with that leg, but they count it as one body. Yet we know it comprises at least 2 or 3 separate bodies. So the number they give is distorted dramatically. It's well over the number that's been reported of murders. Yet it doesn't make the barely makes the local news in Texas, in El Paso. Nationally, it makes no news. I don't think I've ever read a story about it in Boston or New York or out west. Do you have any feel on that, why that might be? And it's just something that's always haunted me privately.
Could you just tell us a little bit more about the actual incident itself? I don't know how many people know about...
Oh, sorry, and correct I do not speak Spanish, but the maquiladora, aside from the Spanish definition, it's part of the NAFTA agreement. It has to do, it's a tax law that we created. We can put the warehouses across the border. I think, was it 18 miles? We can go into their land. The murders, geographically, are of young ladies, Mexican ladies, 99% of them. These murders have been created or have taken place and been mutilated. The bodies have been mutilated, pieces scattered all over the place, all within that turf of that, I believe it's 18 miles that goes inland into Mexico. And there are theories that are very logical about the accountability of how those murders and why those murders and who perpetrated those murders have taken place. The forensic personnel in that matter, Snow is still in Oklahoma. He goes down there quite a bit on that. For the most part, they're Italian, Argentinian-based groups that are doing the forensics on the matter. And I was invited down by our intelligence community, and when I met with the forensics personnel, I wanted to see a number of the bodies. And I am not an expert on forensics, but I identified very quickly that I remember one leg that did not go with one body. And at that point, that triggered a very strong interest on my behalf, and I started going further into the matter. I was never stopped from going as far as I wanted to go into the matter, but what drew my attention was that nobody cared.
But do you think they thought you were a spy? Were they
I don't,
unsure of your own, of who you were?
No, that wouldn't have been an issue because I was under the grace of the drug lords. They were my host. So I had carte blanche. And they didn't like the idea that they were being saddled with the guilt of those murders. And I thought that was very intriguing. And so I've had this conversation with a number of the authorities on both sides of the aisle. It has gone nowhere. I don't know why there's never been a documentary on the issue. And I could not think of another single episode in this North American hemisphere that would trigger a concern about the safety or the abuse of women. I can't think of one single episode that would be greater than that, and particularly since it actually crosses over into the Texas border. Some of those ladies have been kidnapped out of Texas and back into Mexico. So whenever I find somebody that's into this interest or this field, I'm always quick to ask them, anything you can add to my consternation?
Why, your main question is why is the media, why doesn't it appears, why no one is making a documentary about...
Why would this not be the banner?
Unfortunately, that is not the only one, you know. The one thing that for which Twitter is important is because some incidents, I don't like to call it an incident, that, like the one you're telling me, that the media will completely ignore, someone may denounce it on Twitter and bring attention to the media because informed or individuals who care, you know, and the response of the public makes it that they cannot continue to ignore it. You know, I have cases of people in the middle of the jungles in Peru who were fighting a mining company, and there is a priest who is at the forefront, and he was taken by the police, and he sent me a Twitter from jail. And so I was able to put it on Twitter about him and to begin denouncing what was happening to the mining company is called Beaumont, you know? And I don't know, I mean, but it's not just something that happened in Mexico. How much do we know what's happening in Egypt today? You know, or what happened in Syria? You know, the media attention is one day and then it's gone, and there is something else. So it's the indifference.
Maybe it would be helpful if I just added that there are many films and many articles in the press about the murders of Ciudad Juárez. There is a film called The Murders of Ciudad Juárez, and I'm sure you can Google it.
Yes.
There have been untold articles about it, and in this very room, a year ago, Alma Guillermo Prieto, the great journalist from Mexico, gave a presentation about an altar, a whole art project that she created to commemorate the death of these women. So yes. I think you will find that there is a great deal of work being done on that.
I spoke about it in my speech.
Good. Could you hand the mic to her?
Richard Rang, I'm a teacher in human evolutionary biology here. Thank you for your talk, and your documentation of violence against women in this country and the West in general is totally overwhelming and very convincing, and I totally accept it. But at the same time, I think there's very good evidence that there are differences between societies that are raising problems of cultural clashes. And one example is polygyny. So I think it's very well documented that countries that are polygynous, that allow polygyny and that have high rates of polygynously married men and women, are much worse for violence against women than those in which there is monogamy, even though it's bad enough here. So I just wonder how you think about the problem of promoting a better environment for women when this involves cultural clashes. And obviously, one of the clashes is with religion here, because it becomes a problem in the intersection with Islam.
I'd like to say two things with regard to that. I am not one of the people who believe in the demonization of Islam, so that's not me. But at the same time, we call it the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there is the big question as to whether we believe that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights protects everyone, everywhere, from every nation, or whether we believe that human right has to be subjective to religion or culture. And I have thought and struggled a lot with that. I feel, for example, that the use of brutal cultural forms against women in certain countries, where they use the excuse that is culturally what they need to do, we can no longer accept that. The idea that you will stone a young girl of 13 because she was raped and that this will be accepted, I don't accept that. Because there is, and because as well I have discussed this with people who are serious about the Quran and who don't feel that they're, and I don't want to get into this because this is too controversial issue and I'm not an expert on that. But there is something wrong to the idea that you will murder, stone, or kill a woman that was raped. I don't care where, in which nation. And I just think that has to end. And I want to end with that today, that I believe in universal human rights.
Thank you very much.